Stephen Mosier.
What's the last name?
Mosier.
M-I-M-O-S-I-E-R?
M-O-S-H-I-R.
Okay. And what was your name?
Karen Slusky. It's C-A-R-Y-N-S-N-U-S-K-E.
Could you spell that last name again?
S-N-U-S-K-E.
Okay, gotcha. All right, thank you. Now you are pinned like butterflies in your place. All right, so last time we were talking about definitions, and we covered the 6 rules for a definition. Let's see. Let's just do a couple of the exercises remaining on page 45, just to make sure that we have a grip on these ideas. All right, now I know who you are. You cannot escape my gaze. I am like Sauron. Kyle, read number 8, please.
A stranger is a friend one who's yet to meet.
Really, you should sing that. Now, first thing this asks is, identify the genus or genus and the differential.
The genus would be friend.
Yes, so remember, when you give a definition, you're supposed to give you're defining a concept, which is a class of things, and you're supposed to locate that class of things in a slightly broader class of things. So in this case, the genus is friend. So it's saying that a stranger is a type of friend.
And the differential would be yet to meet.
Right. Right away you can see this is a really crappy definition, because strangers are not types of friends, unless you are either simple-minded or absurdly nice, and the two might be related. So this is actually, the problem with this is it's a kind of jokey or metaphorical one. It's a bit like the one we did last time where it said a squirrel is a rat in a fur coat. It's not meant to be taken literally. You're supposed to get some heartwarming, message out of this, like a little kitten poster where the kitten's hanging in there. You're supposed to say, well, everybody is possibly a friend if you just say hi. But of course, they could also be psycho killers. So this one I don't think we need to spend much time on. Let's skip over that one. And Don, can you read number 9?
Education is when someone learns something.
Okay.
This is lacking a genus.
Right. Usually when you see a definition with when or where in it, it means that the genus is not stated. If you had to supply a genus, what might you supply?
An act or an event.
An act or an event. Yes, that might. What's that? A system. A system that oppresses you brutally. Yes. Yeah, education actually is, it's one of those words with different concepts associated with it. It is a process. But it is also, is it different kinds of processes? It's sort of, you can have a process that applies to you. That was educational, you say, after a particularly horrific thing happens to you.
Yeah.
Or it can refer to a sort of general process that applies to different people. Now I want to talk about too broad and too narrow, and none of these are helping very much. This one is just kind of vague, and I think the problem with this is that there are different concepts associated with. Is education when you is everything when you learn something? Is that educational?
No.
Can you think of something where you learn something and it's not educational? I mean, sometimes you could say, well, in a sense, that was, and also, if you learn something, is that enough? Don't you have to be, for it to be education doesn't have to be an educator. Are you acquiring an education if you're the only person that exists in the world? When you learn something, is that education or I mean, because don't there have to be educators for there to be education? It's the tricky one. All right. Let's skip over to more prosaic words like running. Number 13, Ethan.
The genus is an aerobic activity.
Running is an aerobic activity, and the differentiator is useful for quick weight loss. Okay, so it has a genus and a differentiator. Is it too broad? Now remember, if the definition is too broad, then it is true of something that is not running. Is this too broad?
Yeah.
You would be able to give me an example of something that's not running that meets that definition if it's too broad.
Swimming.
Swimming, there you go. And that's not just running while you're in water. That's not really swimming.
Narrow.
What's that?
It's too narrow as well.
Well, we're getting to that. Yes, if it's too narrow, what would show that it's too narrow?
Or other uses for running and
Yes, if it's not just that there's other uses, it has to be that there is something that counts as running that this rules out. People tend to think, yes, this is an important point. People tend to think that a definition is too narrow if it doesn't say much. But that's not enough. I mean, something cannot say stuff. A definition can be very short and uninformative without necessarily being too narrow. To be too narrow, it has to actually exclude things that should count as, in this case, running. So, is there something that is running that is not an aerobic activity useful for quick weight loss?
Rowing?
That's not running, though.
I know, but it's hard to read.
You have to give, for it to be too narrow, now what you've shown is that it's too broad, because there's something that's not running that it is true of. To show that it's too narrow, you have to come up with an example of something that is running that it's not true of.
Well, I mean, you can do it, it doesn't have to just be for weight loss, you can do it for like heart health,
Yeah, but it doesn't say that you are doing it for that. It says that it is useful for that. Yeah.
Fleeing a large predator cat.
It's useful for survival. That's right. It's kind of tricky because it does say that it's useful. But, I don't know, if you're running... Yeah, I mean, there can be very low, I mean, like this. I'm not going to get quick weight loss out of that, right? So slow running is not useful for quick weight loss. Unless you're running into a meat grinder or something. But that's not the kind of weight loss you want. So,
also with running, there's sprinting and stuff like that. If you go at a high speed for a short period of time, you're not going to get the quick weight loss. Whereas if you do sustained running, you will get the aerobic exercise and
in fact, I don't think there's much running that is useful for quick weight loss. I mean, maybe they would sell it to you that, but don't buy. Stay sitting. So, yes, I think it is too narrow as well. Now, what that means, what that usually means is, as it says in number 3, that you haven't been focusing on the essential features, or something that's included in the definition is not really an essential attribute of running. What is that in this case?
It's useful.
The weight loss, yes. Running is not that's not really the point of it. It might be a side effect of it. It might be something that happens to be true even of all running, as in the case of blood. Or at least all human blood is red, but that doesn't mean that's an essential feature of blood. What makes blood blood is that it is for transporting things. And it might be something that happens when you run, but that's not an essential feature of running. What's an essential feature of running is, I don't know, fast walking. Actually, what is the technical difference? Because, there are those people who do Olympic walking, which is always makes me laugh, and they go faster probably than I would run. So what's the difference between walking and running? It's not the speed.
Don't you have to have like 1 foot on the ground at all times?
That's right. So walking, yeah, sometimes people get disqualified from their Olympic walking, you know, it's like it's tragic. They've looked ridiculous for 26 miles or whatever it is, and then they get disqualified because somebody can see like light under both their feet at the same time. Yeah, I think that is the difference. If you've got, you always have to have, whereas if you're running, you're actually in midair with neither foot on the ground. All right, let's do number. Oh, and it wasn't vague or metaphorical. That was, you know, a stranger is a friend that one has yet to meet. Has that problem. Josh, instead your picture is green, so apparently you are the Incredible Hulk. But it doesn't come out as that when I printed it out. Number 14, please.
Jacket is an outer garment designed to protect from the wearer from cold, wind, and rain.
Okay. Does it have a genus or genus?
An outer garment.
Yes. And so the rest of it distinguishes it from other outer garments. That's the differentiation. Is this too broad? If it is too broad, what would that mean?
Something else that you can use that.
Something else would meet this definition. Is there something else that would meet this definition that was not a jacket?
It's a sweater.
Yes, that protects the wearer from cold.
Wind and rain.
And wind and rain, yes. Not much from rain, I wouldn't, I guess. No, I mean, you have like Nordic fishermen who go out in their giant sweaters, and that's all they're wearing.
Clothes.
Well, they're probably wearing boots too.
Clothes.
A cloak, yes. Wow, Superman. Or I was thinking just a coat, you know, like a raincoat or something, a parka. Yes, so there's a fair number of garments that would meet that definition that aren't strictly jackets. So it is too broad. What would make it too narrow?
A jacket that isn't necessary for cold, protecting the wearer from cold, wind.
Yeah, a
Something
jacket
fashionable.
that was not designed for that. Yes, so that's right. Lots of, I mean, if you ever watch, if you ever see, you know, people on the runway, it's not clear that those clothes are actually designed for anything. It's right. So, but yes, you can wear it. You can have a jacket that is not designed for that. There's a Seinfeld episode where Jerry has this new suede jacket, and he takes it out, and it snows on it, and it ruins it. He wanted to reverse it, but he was with someone who said it looked ridiculous because it had a stripy, candy striped interior. You gotta see. All right, so yes, it is too narrow because there are jackets that don't meet that definition. What's the inessential feature that's the problem? Yeah, that is true of some jackets, but actually it's more true of coats, I would have thought. Whereas jackets, what are jackets for? Looking nice. A jacket is an undergarment designed to look nice. Yeah, and it doesn't seem to be strictly the point of a jacket. It's more to do with the way it's constructed. What makes something a jacket is that it's not a shirt and it's not a coat. It's the in-between. So it's not vague, it's not metaphorical, it's not circular. Is any of these circular? If you had to look at these definitions, would you say any of them was obviously guilty of being circular?
Disappointment is not getting what you want.
I think that one's okay just because it's not picking on a single word, because getting it has a broader use and so on. Where it tends to be circular if it uses a word that we would define in terms of the other one, that seems to be almost a synonym.
A conspiracy is a collusion and machination.
Yes,
Yeah.
collusion seems to be awfully close to conspiracy. But yes, otherwise we most of them aren't circular. All right, I think we get the basic idea. Let's move on to the next chapter, today's main topic, which is propositions. Okay. Propositions are to sentences what concepts were to words. So, if you remember, I distinguished between concepts and words. I said, here is a list of things that is true about propositions that you might want to write down. I will go over them. So just as concepts were not the same as words, but we have to use words to convey concepts because we're not telepathic, the same is true of propositions. Propositions are not the same as sentences, but the only way to get propositions across is to use sentences. Sentences are our human way of transmitting propositions, just as words are our way of transmitting concepts. So we saw with words and concepts that you can have many different words that share the same concept, like dog and chien. And when that happens, we say that they mean the same thing. So we sort of defined meaning when it came to words as expressing the same concept. Well, when it comes to sentences, we're going to talk about propositions. So for example, we would say that two sentences mean the same if and only if they both express the same propositions. Now, actually, I put that propositions in possibly plural because, as we'll see later, sentences can express more than one proposition. But actually, that's like words and concepts. A single word can express several concepts, as we saw with the word light. One word, it can have many different concepts associated with it. Or pen. That's an example where the different concepts, they have nothing in common. There's nothing in common between a writing implement and an animal enclosure. Okay, so propositions are not the same as sentences, but propositions are expressed by sentences. Think of the proposition of a sentence as capturing the meaning of the sentence. And what that means is it sort of conveys the information involved. So, let me put it this way. Here's an example of two sentences, so pause in your writing down and listen to my words of wisdom. Two different sentences can express a single proposition, as it says here. Just as dog and chien are two different words that can express the same concept, two different sentences can express the same proposition. I'll give you a simple example. Obviously, you could give an example from different languages. You could say, the dog is blue. I don't know why you'd say that, but you'd say that because I know the French for that. Le chien est bleu. Those are two different sentences, but they mean the same. They express the same proposition. Now, you can also do that with two different sentences in English. So, for example, I could say, I hit the ball, or I could say the ball was hit by me. We say in logic that they mean the same because they express the same proposition. What does that mean? It means they convey the same information. They say the same thing. What is the thing that they say? The proposition. So the proposition is sort of a description of a state of affairs. So the way to tell whether or not, we will look at some examples where it looks like they're pretty close. The way to test whether or not two different sentences are actually expressing the same, exactly the same proposition, is to do with what is called truth conditions. I'll explain that in a second. But if you had to write down one thing and remember it forever, if you had to write it down in blood or carve it on the back of your hand, as, what's that evil teacher in Harry Potter?
Umbridge.
There you go, Umbridge. If you had to carve one statement on the back of your hand about propositions, it would be this. That propositions have truth value. What that means is they are either true or false. All propositions are either true or false. That doesn't mean that we know the truth value of all propositions. you can have a true proposition where we may never know its truth value. So, for example, somewhere in the universe there is an alien that looks like a purple octopus. That is a proposition. It is either true or false. The fact that we don't know its truth value doesn't stop it having one. So don't confuse truth value with us knowing the truth value. Something can be true or false without knowing it. Okay? Okay, so propositions have truth value. They are either true or false, even if we don't know which one they are. Now, what this means is that not every sentence, in fact, expresses a proposition. Because there are some sentences that do not say something that is either true or false. All sentences say something. Well, that's not quite true. Here's a minor tangent. There is a difference between the rules of grammar and the rules of meaning. A sentence can be perfectly grammatical, but meaningless. The rules of grammar are things like, you must have a subject and you must have a predicate and things like that. You can have all those things, but it could still be gibberish. Like a favorite example of another teacher of mine was, colorless green ideas sleep furiously. Okay, that sentence makes no sense whatsoever. That doesn't express any proposition because none of the bits work together. If it's colorless, it can't be green, and ideas can't be either colorless or green, and they don't sleep, and you can't sleep furiously anyway. But grammatically, that's got all the right words. It's got nouns and verbs in the right places. So meaning is slightly different from grammar. There's a difference between what is sometimes called syntax, which is grammatical, and what we call semantics, which has to do with meaning. And we're looking at semantics right now. Okay, but there are perfectly grammatical and even meaningful sentences that don't express propositions because they haven't got a truth value. What kind of sentences, can you think of certain kinds of sentences that are neither true nor false? Actually, I just gave you an example. A question. That's right. Sentences, not just sentences, that's just the genus. I need to differentiate. Sentences that do not express propositions. And questions would be an example of a whole class of sentences that don't do this. What time is it? True or false? That doesn't make sense, right? Because questions don't have truth value. Why not? Well, because, as philosophers in the 20th century pointed out, it was pretty obvious, but they pointed it out anyway, different parts of language are for different things. A huge chunk of language, and it's the chunk that logic is concerned with, is to do with conveying information. That's the part that logic cares about. Logic is an attempt to systematize that part of language, and as we will see later on in the class, symbolize it in a way that is clear and non-ambiguous. But some parts of language are not for conveying information. And questions, the role of questions is something different. It's not meant to convey information, it's meant to help you acquire information. What other kinds of sentences are not true or false? Do not express propositions. Yes?
Like an answer to a question.
Well, no, that does. So if I said, what time is it? And you said, it's 11:26, you would be saying something true.
What if you didn't say it's before, just like 11:26?
Well, then it would be a fragment sentence, but what you actually meant was it's, right? We get away with a lot of fragments in everyday life where, like, what's the weather tonight? What's the weather today? Rain. is that normally we would say that's true or false. If it's sunny, you actually said something false, but that's only because we sort of fill in the blanks. We mean to say that it's raining. We don't, you're not just saying a noun. Any other types of sentences?
Command.
A command, that's right. So think harder, I might say. A command is an example of something that is neither true or false. Do your homework. True or false? Well, we'll see, won't we? Now, command means that the function of that particular part of the language is to get people to do stuff. Any more?
Interjections.
Interjections.
Bash my knee against something. And
Yeah, I'm going to call that exclamations.
Yeah.
Right. So, suppose I look out of the window and I see a flying saucer, a Vogon, part of the Vogon fleet that I was talking about last time. I might say, knowing me, holy shit. But that doesn't express anything true or false. It is just an exclamation. I could say something in those circumstances that did express a proposition, like, I am amazed to see that flying saucer there. Right? That would be true, because I would be amazed. But just an exclamation doesn't have truth value. Probably because in most cases they're fragment sentences. There's one other kind of thing that I'm going to include that's quite rare and a little unusual. I'm going to call them speech acts. That term is used a little bit more broadly in philosophy, but it conveys what I want to convey. A speech act, seeing as we're talking about Harry Potter, a spell would be an example of a speech act, a fictional kind of speech act, because in saying the words, if there were such things as spells, the point of saying the words is not to convey information, it's to achieve something by the mere act of saying the words. Now, there aren't really spells, unfortunately, or perhaps fortunately, but there are occasions where we say things because the saying of them does something. Like, I promise to pay, or if you say, I promise. In saying that, you are creating some kind of a verbal contract. So saying the words, you're not trying to convey information, you're not trying to say something true or false, you're just trying to establish a contract. Other examples would be, I arrest you in the name of the law. By saying those words, you are trying to arrest someone. Now, of course, you can fail to perform the act. If I'm not a police officer, I can say I arrest you in the name of the law and it does nothing. I'm just insane. So you can fail or succeed in a speech act, but they are not things that are either true or false. You know, I pronounce, with this ring I thee wed, you know, and there's nobody there. What a tragedy. That would be an example of you're trying to achieve a marriage but in the wrong circumstances. So those are examples of parts of language where you might fail to express propositions.
Would rhetorical statements fall under speech acts?
Rhetorical statements are, well, rhetorical, normally what we say is rhetorical questions. And rhetorical questions are not questions. Rhetorical questions are a kind of question that is not actually a question. It is a disguised way of expressing a proposition. So, you know, imagine you smash, you get your parents buy your car, lucky you, and you smash it on the first time out. You come in and say, I smashed the car, and your mom says, could you be any stupider, right? She's not actually asking for information. She's not expecting you to say, well, actually, I could be stupider. Then probably you should shut up at this point. But that's just a disguised way of saying you are very stupid. Rhetorical questions, incidentally, are very bad style. Do not use them. Yeah? The kind of people who use them are politicians, because it's sort of a way of trying to establish a a bogus kind of contact with your audience. So, you know, it's like saying, we're all Americans here, aren't we? It's just don't do it. Don't use rhetorical questions. So, propositions have truth value. Different sentences can express a single proposition, can express the same single proposition, like I hit the ball was hit by me. Now, how do you tell whether or not it's the same proposition? Well, if it has the same truth conditions, it is the same proposition. What do I mean by truth conditions? I mean this. You can imagine a sentence being uttered in various circumstances. Like, for example, today is Wednesday. I could utter that today and it would be true. I could utter it tomorrow and it would be false. Okay, so those are two different truth conditions. There are conditions that affect the truth value of the sentence. Or grass is green could be uttered on this planet and it would be true, and maybe there's a planet with pink grass, and if you uttered grass is green on that planet, it would be false. All right, so different circumstances is simply what truth conditions are. To say that two propositions are the same if they have the same truth conditions means if in any circumstances where one is true, the other is true, and in a circumstance where one is false, the other is false, in other words, they always share the same truth value, then they're the same proposition. The way to tell if you've got two different propositions is if you can come up with a situation where one of them is true and the other one is false. If you can do that, you have two different propositions. So I'm defining meaning as two sentences mean the same if and only if they both express the same proposition. What that means is, the way to tell if two sentences do not mean the same is if you can imagine one of them false at the same time that the other one is true. Okay? Now that's a slightly narrow usage of the word meaning, but it's the one we're going to use in this class. Now, I'm going to distinguish that from connotation, which sometimes is used interchangeably with meaning, but here we're going to say that they're different things. And I'll explain a little bit about that when we've done some examples. But let's see. Okay. Jet, could you read number 1, please?
You have a lovely view from your window.
No, I don't. It's Flint.
You have a beautiful view from your window.
Okay, so we have two different sentences there. Do they express the same proposition? Are they conveying exactly the same information? So again, the way to test is to, can you imagine a case where this would be true and this would be false, or vice versa? Or is any circumstance where this is true going to make this true, and any circumstance that makes this false also makes this false? What do you think?
I would think they'd be the same.
They'd be the same. So anytime it's true to say you have a lovely view from your window, it would also be true to say you have a beautiful view. Yeah? Anyone disagree? Yes?
Just because like a view is lovely, doesn't mean it has to be beautiful.
Well, can you come up with an example? It's always good to be able to come up with examples. If you can come up with an example where it's true to say that it's lovely, but false to say that it's beautiful, or vice versa. Yes?
Well, you could look at it as lovely being a more personalized, like more perspective-based.
Some people say beauty is in the eye of the beholder.
Or yeah, or vice versa. I mean, like what's beautiful to some, but then again, what's lovely to some, I don't know.
Now, it's worth pointing out here that some people are a little, some people might want to say there aren't propositions here because they don't have truth value. Why? Because it's up to, they don't have a determinate truth value. Some people would say it's lovely, some people would say it's beautiful, and you've got differing truth values. That doesn't matter. We're going to assume that there are objective standards of loveliness and beautiness. Beauty.
I like like the beautiness.
What's that?
Said I like the beautiness.
The beautiness, yeah, it's a good word. I'm going to argue that there is a slight difference between the two. And here's what I'll say. I think lovely contains kind of warm, fuzzy niceness, right? You think kittens are lovely. You see a bunch of kittens, you say, oh, lovely. Whereas beauty can be kind of stark. So for example, you might say an evil witch is beautiful, but I don't think you'd say she's lovely. Or imagine that you're about to die of dehydration in the middle of the Sahara. You can look around you and say, this is beautiful. You know, the harsh beauty of this desert. But I don't think you say, lovely, you know, at that point. That's what I would suggest. But they're pretty close. Okay, the next one is more clear-cut. Karen.
Stealing is a sin versus stealing is a crime. I would say that they're not the same proposition, because something can be a crime and not a sin.
Can you think of an
Stealing
example?
a crime, not a sin.
Well, even if stealing is both, can you think of an example where it's true to say something is a sin and well, or maybe you can explain the circumstances that make stealing a sin, and if they're different circumstances for making stealing a crime.
Well, it's kind of hard to look at sin objectively, because it kind of depends on your beliefs, right? So
What kind of beliefs?
probably your religious beliefs.
Yes. So in other words, sin is a religious concept.
Mm-hmm.
What about crime?
Legal concept.
A legal concept. So, and laws are obviously different from, the laws of the land are different from the laws, unless you live in a theocracy, which fortunately we don't. You can say, you can imagine an island that has no laws, in which case nothing would be a crime, but you know, maybe there would still be sins. Or you can imagine a very lax religion where nothing was a sin, but you would still have laws of the land. You know, and you can certainly think of things that are, nobody thinks are sinful, like, I don't know, speeding or something, or...
Sin is subjective and crime is...
Ooh, I don't think most religious people would say that sin is subjective. There are rules. If you violate them, you're committing a sin. But yeah.
But not everyone, you know where I go with
Well, obviously somewhere sinful.
that. Spiel.
Okay, so that was pretty straightforward. They don't mean the same. They're conveying different things. They can both be, but notice, they can both in fact be true. Stealing is a sin. Stealing is a crime, where we are. But that doesn't mean that they mean the same. So having the same truth value here and now doesn't mean meaning the same. You have to have the same truth value in all possible circumstances. Okay? So, because obviously, having the same truth value doesn't make you mean the same, because today is Wednesday is true, and this is yellow is true. But today is Wednesday does not mean this is yellow, because both happen to be true in these circumstances. All right. Number 3. Cat.
The elderly person ahead of me was doing 25 miles an hour. The geezer ahead of me was doing about 25 miles an hour.
Okay. Do they mean the same?
Yes.
No.
Did anyone say no?
I said no.
Why not?
A geezer is an old man, an elderly person can be a man or a woman.
Very good. Yes, that is true. Elderly person, so as stated, they are actually different in meaning, because geezer, I think geezer is restricted in meaning to old man, you're right. But suppose this said, the elderly man ahead of me, then would they mean the same?
No, because the connotation is totally different. Like, I mean, if you say a geezer, that's like derogative, but if you say...
But in this class, we're going to distinguish, you are right, but in this class we're going to distinguish between meaning and connotation. So if I ask you, do they mean the same, the connotation doesn't affect that. So what affects whether or not they mean the same? Just this. Do they express the same proposition? If it's true to say that an elderly person ahead of me is doing about 25 miles per hour, is it elderly man, let's say? Is it true to say that the geezer ahead of me? Are they both true in the same circumstances? Yes. So we're going to say they mean the same once we've made the gender-based correction. But this is where I introduced the notion of connotation. And connotation, what did I say? Connotation has to do with the feelings associated with the words you are using, not to do with the proposition you are expressing. And the best way I thought the best way, and then I discovered most people didn't know what a euphemism was, but I'm going to struggle on. Who has heard the word euphemism? Who knows what it means? What does it mean?
I don't know the dictionary definition, but euphemisms are
tricky to define.
tricky to define by all means.
Can you give me an example? You probably shouldn't give me an example of what it's a euphemism for.
He broke through the door like a battering ram.
Yeah, that's not really an example. That sounds more like a metaphor. Anyone? Yes.
I can't think of one besides this, but something like spanking the monkey. Or
Oh boy. Yes, which is it's a humorous euphemism for masturbation. I was just going to go with poop and shit, but there you go. That's because I've had small children. You think you'll never say the word poop until you have little kids. Yes. What is the difference? Poop and shit, they mean the same thing, right? They have the same concept because they're individual words, they're not sentences. They capture the same thing. Anything that you could point to and truly say that is poop, you could point to and truly say that is shit. Now, of course, shit is used more broadly. You can say, life is shit. I suppose you could say life is poop if you were very polite. My life, I'm going to commit suicide because my life is poop. At least you're polite to the end. So what is a euphemism then? If poop is an example of a euphemism, what is it?
Placing like a rude or informal term with something else. It's not taken as rude there.
Yes, it's a word that tries to capture something usually nasty in a nice sounding way. The military are masters of euphemisms, partly because they have to talk about nasty things a lot.
Stealing from the enemy is resource denial.
Resource denial is stealing from the enemy. Oh, I was thinking of collateral damage. What does the phrase collateral damage mean?
Dead civilians.
Dead civilians, that's right. It means we killed a bunch of people who were just doing nothing but living their lives. Oops, war sucks. But if you say collateral damage, that doesn't sound as bad, does it? There was collateral damage when we burned down the village, in that there was an orphanage there. It's a way of saying something bad without it sounding bad. So, a euphemism is a classic example of something. A euphemism and the word it is a euphemism for have the same meaning, but they have different connotations. So connotation is to do with the feelings, right? So geezer and elderly gentleman have the same meaning. They pick out the same things. But one is insulting and the other isn't. Okay? Euphemism, connotation matters an awful lot in politics and advertising, which are essentially the same thing these days. Because they have consultants to do this. Consultants' whole job is to come up with terms for labeling your opponent that make people feel badly when they hear them. And conversely, you want positive sounding labels for yourself. So for example, in the abortion dispute, one side, the side in favor of keeping most abortions legal, refers to themselves as pro-choice. Because who doesn't like choice? Choice is good. This is America. We all want choice. Whereas the other side refer to themselves as pro-life. Because life is good. I like life and choice. Where do I stand? Right? Whereas, of course, they want to reserve a negative term for their opponents. So, for example, pro-choicers refer to their opponents as anti-life. Anti-choicers. Whereas pro-lifers refer to their opponents as godless baby killers. there's you want to use it, and ideally, actually, you try and infect the neutral term with connotations to your purpose. So, for example, the label liberal in political philosophy is kind of a neutral term, and actually in political philosophy it refers to both Republicans and Democrats, because it refers to people who believe that humans have rights, individuals have rights and are essentially equal, which is what it says in the Constitution. The Constitution is liberal in the political sense, but it has come to be used in this country to people on the sort of Democrat side of the aisle, and has come to have negative connotations, which is sort of a victory for consultants on the Republican side. So, connotation is very important, but not in this class. In this class, we're going to ignore connotation. We're going to say that we're just going to focus on the propositions and concepts. We're not going to worry about the feelings associated with them. We're going to be like Spock. We don't care about feelings. Feelings are illogical. So, number 3, we would say that they mean the same because they have the same truth conditions. The only difference between them is one of connotation. Okay? Make sense? How about number 4, Jacob?
Wendy is a journalist, and Wendy works for a newspaper.
No, much longer, because newspapers are going under.
I'd say it's definitely a different concept, because you could be a journalist and not work for a newspaper.
Right, you could work for TV news. I guess that's news. Yes, you could be one without being the other. Yes.
You could also work for a newspaper without being a journalist.
That's right, you could sweep the floors, or you could be an editor or something like that. Yes, so they're obviously different in meaning. Connotation doesn't even have to enter into it. Here, they're obviously different in connotation. Mellow individual sounds kind of cool, unmotivated slob, not so positive. But actually I think they're different in meaning too. You can be mellow but motivated, I think. What about number 6? It's Zena.
The enemy's intelligence operative was terminated with extreme prejudice. The enemy spy was killed.
Yes, this is an example of Pentagon speak. Terminated with extreme prejudice is a way of saying we killed them. Do they mean the same?
There is a meaning there.
Do they express the same proposition? If you can think of an example, remember the test. If you can think of an example where this might be true without this one being true, then they're different. Yeah.
He could have been run over by a bus on accident, but...
Or by accident. Yes. Now, you're quite right. Because when you say the enemy spy was killed, that kind of leaves it open. Like you can say Joe was killed in a car accident. It doesn't mean that we killed him. Whereas this one, terminated with extreme prejudice, car crashes are not terminations with extreme prejudice. That means we took them out, and we're rather pleased with ourselves.
Homicide.
What's that?
Vehicular homicide.
If it's vehicular homicide, then somebody's guilty. Whereas if you just crashed into a pole, it's vehicular suicide. Yes. So, or you could be killed in an avalanche. He was killed in an avalanche, and nobody's.
There's many different ways that the spy could have been killed that weren't necessarily terminated with extreme prejudice.
Right. So I think, and the other difference is I think you can actually be an intelligence operative without being a spy. Like Edward Snowden, I think he worked for the NSA. Yes, he had something much more dangerous than guns. He had a computer. He was an intelligence operative, but I don't think he was a spy. He just sat behind a keyboard all day, reading your texts. Let's see. Let's skip over Brandy to number 8.
It was a tense moment. It was an anxious.
Did those express the same proposition?
I don't think
Okay, remember the challenge, if you're going to say that they're different, you have to see if you can come up with an example where it would be true to say one but not the other.
I mean, I think that you could be tense without being necessarily anxious.
What's the difference?
I think you could be tense, like emotional-wise, or like tense as in nervous, maybe, but not necessarily anxious.
So what is anxious then?
Specific.
I think
Specific
anxious
to what?
refers to more like uneasy, like.
You're
not-
dealing with fight or flight.
Stop
Dealing
cracking your
with
knuckles.
anxious-
Stop that, stop that. I hate that. Yes.
Dealing with fight or flight emotion is what I feel from anxious, whereas tense, it could be there could be tension in the air between you and a person. You don't necessarily have to be anxious to have to feel tension with someone.
Yeah, I mean,
It could be romantic tension, it could be sexual tension, it
True.
could be political tension.
yeah, I was thinking like, the example I always use is, imagine you're Usain Bolt at the beginning of a race. You're tense, but you're not anxious because you know you're going to win because you're Usain Bolt. So, yeah, anxiety means that, you think something bad is going to happen to you, whereas I don't think tense necessarily captures it. All right, so we get the basic idea, I hope. The difference between meaning, as we're going to use it in this class, which is to do with expressing the same proposition, and connotation. All right, next, we're not going to talk about metaphors. Metaphors are, strictly speaking, false. Propositions and grammar. Let's see if we finished writing everything that we need to write about propositions. So we said the same truth conditions means the same proposition. This says single sentences, you've got my handwriting is getting up boy. Single sentences can express multiple propositions. You can have, we've so far looked at fairly simple sentences where there's just one subject and one predicate. You can have single sentences express multiple propositions. There are two ways this could happen. One way is a bad way, which is where there are the sentence is genuinely ambiguous. What does ambiguity mean?
There could be multiple meanings.
Yeah, so a lot of people say that it's vague, but no, ambiguity is not the same as vagueness. Vagueness means you can have a sentence where it's clear what it means, but the sort of boundaries of what it means are unclear. Like, he was balding, right? Exactly how much hair does that cover? It's vague. Whereas ambiguity can mean there are at least two very clear but very different meanings. So a sentence is ambiguous if there are two possible meanings for it. And when this happens with sentences, this is called amphiboly. Because you can have ambiguous words that can mean more than one thing, but when it happens to entire sentences, sometimes you can have sentences that are ambiguous because they include words that are ambiguous. But sometimes it can be the word order that makes a sentence makes a sentence ambiguous. Like a classic example is, I shot the elephant in my pajamas.
Was the elephant wearing your pajamas or were you?
Well, this is a joke. This is a joke, a Groucho Marx joke. He's a great explorer, and he's just come back from Africa, and he said, one day I shot an elephant in my pajamas. What he was doing in my pajamas, I'll never know, right? So you get the idea is that you're supposed to think he just got out of bed and shot an elephant, but because the sentence is actually ambiguous as to who is wearing the pajamas. It's unclear. One of the advantages that symbolic logic has, which is what we're going to get to later in the class, is it is never ambiguous. That is what some of the critics of natural language and the proponents of logic say is an advantage of logic. It avoids ambiguity. Ambiguity can be bad. It can also be funny. Here are examples that are supposed to be taken from real newspaper headlines. My favorite is, just because it's kind of subtle, is this one. Teacher strikes idle kids. What are the two meanings to that?
Chirping a kid.
Yeah, you lazy little bastard, right? That's one. A teacher. Yes, but what's the actual meaning?
The teachers are on strike, the kids are idle.
Yes. So in the way that you're thinking, is strike is a verb. So the teacher strikes, and idle is an adjective. The kids are idle. Whereas the real meaning is strikes is a noun, right? They're on strike. The teacher strikes have caused the kids to have nothing to do. So it has idled them. So idle in that case is a verb. Lawyers give poor free legal advice. What are the two meanings there?
Either the legal advice is being given to the poor, or
Yeah, so the real meaning is
pretty poor.
yeah, the real meaning is that poor is a noun referring to poor people. So lawyers, out of the generosity of their hearts, are giving free legal advice to the poor. But what it sounds like is their legal advice is pretty shitty, right? Juvenile court to try shooting defendant. They've tried everything else. What are the two meanings there? Yes.
Literally shooting the poor person.
Try as in attempt.
Yep.
Or?
And go through a trial case.
Yes, try as in put them on trial, which is what it really means. Auto's killing 110 a day. Let's resolve to do better. Are we trying to kill more or are we trying to kill fewer? March planned for next August. I think this is my favorite. Patient at death's door. Doctors pull him through. Have they saved him or have they finished him off? Okay, so those are examples of ambiguity. That would be sentences where there are at least two distinct propositions that could be associated with them. That's bad. Whenever that's happened, you should try to rewrite your sentence so that it is not ambiguous. The other way in which, the way that we're more interested in, at least at this level, is that you can have a long sentence that contains within it many propositions. There's no ambiguity, it's just that the sentence has more than one proposition that's being expressed. Obviously this can happen because one of the great things about languages, English certainly one of them, is that you can take two sentences and make one sentence. Using what? Conjunctions. Yes, conjunctions are grammatical features that are like sentence glue. They are ways of sticking two sentences together and making one sentence. But if you have two sentences, each of which expresses a proposition, and you make one sentence, you've still got two propositions. So if I say today is Wednesday, that's a proposition, and I say this is logic, this class is logic, that's a proposition. But if I say it all in one, today is Wednesday and this is logic, there's still two propositions. So the number of sentences is not the same as the number of propositions. Okay? All right. Now, give me an example of conjunctions. Give me an example of, I'll say it again, give me an example of conjunctions. And is probably the simplest and most common. They're on the board. Nothing else? What else? Or. Good memories. Therefore, yes, that one's actually something of we're going to call later an indicator word. That word helps to reveal logical structure. But, yes.
So. Yes.
Yet. Now, there are more. All of these are grammatically conjunctions, because grammatically a conjunction is simply sentence glue. Logically, though, they're very different, as we'll see, because they have different logical effects. And the three main types that we're going to distinguish among are and, or, and if, ... then. All of them are ways of joining two propositions together. I shoot you and you're dead. Two true things. I shoot you or you're dead. Don't know how that would happen. If I shoot you, then you're dead, right? All of them are ways of joining two propositions together. One is I shoot you, that could be true or false, you're dead, that could be true or false. Maybe you die of fright when I pull out my fake gun. I'm English. We don't have guns. We don't know about guns. We're scared of guns, so you're safe. I think, yeah, what did they say? That the number of times the British police in total discharged a weapon was beaten in by one police officer in Ferguson, Missouri. In the number of times they discharged it in an entire year.
Most London police officers don't even carry weapons?
No police officers carry weapons except, small task forces. Police officers just don't carry, they carry sticks, and nowadays they carry tasers, so, don't piss off a police officer, but, in England we prefer stabbings, much more personal. No, it's true actually, the number of stabbings in London is quite scary, but at least, so stay fit and you should be okay. They are ways of joining propositions together. Now, one skill that we'll be practicing more in the next class is identifying how many propositions there are in a sentence. And there are ways that you can sort of multiply it beyond usefulness. But for now, we will note that you can have a single sentence. If it involves a grammatical conjunction, there will be at least two propositions. There are minor exceptions. So for example, the word and can actually be used not as a conjunction, as for example, when you're talking about like a firm, like Johnson & Johnson. The baby powder was Johnson & Johnson, right? You don't have two propositions there. The and there is just part of the name, right? But in most cases where and is being used, it is being used to join two sentences together, and you have a proposition each. Okay, now, when you just have, there are two things that a sentence can do to a proposition. As we've seen, some sentences don't even express a proposition. What kind of sentences don't express a proposition? Questions, commands, those guys. All right, but the ones we're interested in logic do express propositions. What does it mean for a sentence to express a proposition? It means that there's a connection, that a proposition is connected. Propositions are weird metaphysical entities. They're not the same as sentences. You can't trip over them, but in some sense they exist. So a sentence expresses a proposition if there's some connection between the sentence and that proposition. If you can think of a sentence as related to a proposition. That's not very clear, but I think the main point is to distinguish it from asserting. A proposition can also assert, a sentence can also assert a proposition. Now, I drew a little handy little graph here, or chart, to represent the relationship between expressed propositions and asserted ones. All asserted propositions are also expressed, but not all expressed propositions are asserted. Okay? So first of all, you work out if there's a proposition there at all. If your sentence is a question, there's no proposition. But suppose you have a declarative sentence that appears to be saying something. Then it expresses at least one proposition. Does it also assert that proposition? Well, a sentence asserts a proposition when you know that the proposition is true as a result of the sentence. That's not an ideal definition, but I think it will do. Okay, So, we've been looking at short examples, like today is Wednesday. Does that sentence assert that it is Wednesday? Yes, because if I tell you that the whole sentence is true, then it is true that it is Wednesday, right? So, and in general, here's a general rule that you could write down. If there's only one proposition involved, then it is both expressed and asserted. So for all short sentences, they both express and assert their propositions. The difficulty arises when you have a longer sentence that expresses more than one proposition. When that happens, it's possible that at least one of those propositions is not asserted. As, for example, in the case of conjunctions. So, for example, suppose I say, well, let me ask you now. Suppose I say, there are coins in my pocket and there are keys in my pocket. How many propositions are there? 2. Are they both expressed? Yes. If you can count them, they're expressed. Right? If they're there, they're expressed. Are they both asserted by that sentence? So the sentence is, there are coins in my pocket and there are keys in my pocket. Is there are coins in my pocket asserted? Yes. If I tell you that the whole thing is true, do you know that there are coins in my pocket?
Yes.
Yes. All right. Is there are keys in my pocket asserted? Again, if I tell you the whole thing is true, do you know there are keys in my pocket? Yes. So what that tells us about and is when you have two propositions, let's call them P and Q, we'll be doing a lot more of that later, both propositions are asserted. Obviously they're both expressed, but are they also asserted? Yes. And this happens with all words that work exactly like and. What is another word that works exactly like and?
Also.
Also, yes. But. The only difference between but and is what? Why is it sometimes appropriate to say but instead of and?
Because it's excluding something.
Not really excluding. Well, how about this? Which would be more appropriate? And or but? I was run over by a 6-ton truck. I survived.
But
Why?
Looking at like the positive.
What's that?
Looking at like the positive.
Unexpected.
It's unexpected, yeah. So in other words, it's when the second one is surprising in light of the first. So, like, I ate my dinner and then I went out. You wouldn't say, I ate my dinner, but I went out, dun dun dun, you know, unless it was a massive dinner and a tiny door to go out. I don't know. But if it's, you know, like I fell off a 7-story building, but I survived, you would say but. But in general, they work the same logically. Both are asserted. If I say I fell off a 7-story building, but I survived, I would be asserting both of them. Okay? What about or? Suppose I say, there are coins in my pocket or there are keys in my pocket. And I tell you, this is a true sentence. There are coins in my pocket or there are keys in my pocket. Does the truth of that sentence guarantee that there are coins in my pocket?
no.
Does the truth of that sentence guarantee that there are keys in my pocket?
No.
No. So what does that mean? It means that neither P nor Q is asserted. They're both expressed, because they're always expressed. If they're there, they're expressed. But they're not asserted. Now, there is something that is asserted, and that is the whole thing. Because the whole thing is also a proposition. Because it can be true or false. Is it true that there are either coins or keys in my pocket? What would make it false that there are either keys or coins in my pocket? If there are neither keys nor coins. And we'll get into the truth values of sentences like this later on. Truth tables, yes. More fun than a barrel full of monkeys. But only because a barrel full of monkeys is not fun. All right. Finally, we have if-then. If there are coins in my pocket, then there are keys in my pocket. Suppose I tell you that that's true. Do you know that there are coins in my pocket?
Yes.
Yes or no?
No.
No. Do you know that there are keys in my pocket?
Only
No.
if there's keys.
So what does that tell us? What does that tell us about P and Q here? Neither or neither are asserted. So in other words, if and then is like or, not like and. Okay, now there are other circumstances that might make something expressed but not asserted. Suppose I say, I believe the children are the future. Suppose I were to say that. There are actually two propositions there. One of them is the whole thing. That's a statement about my beliefs, right? What would make that sentence true or false is what I believe, right? If I believe the children are the future, then it's true. If I don't believe that, then it's false. What's the other proposition?
The children are the future.
The fact that the children are the future. Now, is the children are the future asserted or not in the context of I believe the children are the future?
No.
It's not. How can we show that? Because you can imagine I believe the children are the future being true without it being true that the children are the future, right?
I believe.
What's that?
The belief.
Yes, because you can believe false things, right? I believe that I'm going to win $1 million. I'm clinging to that belief. Now, what about if I change the word believe to know? What if I said, I know that I have keys in my pocket? If I tell you that, if that whole sentence is in fact true, do you know that there are keys in my pocket?
Yes.
Yes!
Because you know.
So why is that different? What's the difference between know and believe?
No, serious.
Yes?
One's asserted.
Know is a fact and belief is a...
Yes. No, you cannot know something false. If it turns out that it was false, then you didn't know it. You just thought you knew it. You can believe false things, but you can't know false things. So if it is true that I knew that, Joe Bob was the murderer, then Joe Bob was the murderer. But if I believe that Joe Bob was the murderer, he might be innocent. All right, let's look at, just before I let you go, let's look at the examples on page 71. By next time, you will all have your books. That is a statement of fact. I am asserting that. Yes, well, most of you do have the book. I mean the textbook. Okay, well, we'll talk about that. I will tell you off for that in the appropriate place. Brandon, can you read number 1 of C on page 71?
I don't care whether it rains.
Now notice, this is like what I was just talking about. The whole sentence is one proposition. I don't care whether it rains. That's a statement about my feelings, right? Whereas it rains is also a proposition. It can be true or false. Normally we would say it is raining. That's just a quirk of English. But is it rains asserted in the context of that sentence? Why not? What's that? Because the test is, suppose you know the sentence is true. Suppose you know I really don't care. Does that prove that it's raining? No, it doesn't, because I might not know whether it's raining. It's just a case where it's not asserting that it's raining. Okay, so in that case, it's expressed, of course, because it's there, but it's not asserted. Hunter, number 2.
I could fly if I had wings.
They'd have to be freaking big wings. And not just you, just anybody. That always pisses me off about superheroes with wings. Like, they would have to be like the size of the building to be able to lift a human. I mean, like the biggest bird ever weighs a ridiculously small amount compared with us. Yeah, like, but anyway, don't get me started on wings. All right. I had wings. Is that asserted or not asserted? Suppose it's true that I could fly if I had wings of the correct size. I would also have to have giant muscles to move, but I don't want to get into that. If that sentence is true, does it prove that I have wings?
No.
No. So in other words, that I had wings is expressed but not asserted. That's a pretty poor chorus there, but maybe better next time. Finally, the prosecution said the butler committed the murder, but in fact the butler was out playing bingo that night. So the whole thing is the sentence. In the context of that sentence is, the butler was out playing bingo that night. Is it asserted, Jamie? If you know that the whole thing is true, do you know that the butler was out playing bingo? Yes, so it is asserted because it's got but, which works like and. All right, I will release you now. Do not forget that you have a homework. I will post it probably sometime tomorrow, and you will get an email at your college, your UM-Flint email address. And that's it.